All right, welcome everybody to the January 2020. Larry, please, I'm going to mute you because there's a lot of interference that's coming on your line. Thank you. Thank you very much. So welcome everybody. Do we have any newcomers to this meeting? You raise your hand or unmute you and make noise or something.
Wendy, in addition to our guest for this evening, Dr. Bailey, Larry Zeb is with us. He's going to be our presenter next month.
Oh, wonderful. That's great. Okay, well, welcome, Larry, and we look forward to seeing you next month. And so I think we need to get to it. We have an exciting evening ahead. So for our first 15, we have Frank Morgan, who's going to talk about a show called Here's Morgan. Presumably he didn't create the show, but but I like the coincidence of if it is a coincidence of last names. So Frank, I will make you a co-host and then you can make your magic.
Hopefully.
Oh, we hope, yes. Well, I'm sure you've checked it all out. You are now officially, you have the keys to the kingdom.
Okay. All right, we're going to share screen. Sound. So far, so good.
Yay.
All right. Yeah, it's the Henry Morgan Show, or Here's Morgan. There were a couple of the names by which Henry Morgan had his radio programs. Actually, he was born with the name Henry von Ost on March 31st, 1915 in New York City. He was a humorist and commentator about life. He graduated from high school when he was just past 16 years of age, and he found work in radio. First, he was a page for WMCA in New York City, and then he went to announcing jobs in Philadelphia, Duluth, Minnesota, Boston, and New York. In 1940, he was given his first program by WOR in New York called Here's Morgan. Now, he's not to be confused with another actor who went by the name of Henry Morgan also, but then he changed the use of his first name to Harry. And, you know, actually I found that some of the guides have the wrong Morgan listed in there as participating in certain shows. But Henry Morgan on the left became Harry Morgan, and of course, von Ost continued as Henry Morgan. Now, Morgan had issues with radio executives and his sponsors. He was fired from his announcing job in Philadelphia when he included the names of station executives on a missing persons announcement he was reading. It was several days later before the prank was discovered, and the executives didn't like it. An obvious sponsor for his show would, of course, be the candy bar O. Henry. During one commercial, he said, "Yes, O. Henry is a meal in itself, but you eat 3 meals of O. Henry's and your teeth will fall out." So they didn't like that a whole lot, but they kept him. In another broadcast, he said, if children were fed enough candy bars, they would get sick and die. So not surprisingly, at that point, the sponsor withdrew. Another sponsor was Adler Shoes. Now, on some occasions, Morgan referred to the owner as Old Man Adler. And there was some motion by the sponsor to quit their advertising until they saw an increase in their sales, and then they were satisfied that he could call him Old Man Adler. Another sponsor that he had fun with was the Schick Injector Razor. And I'm going to play for you an brief audio of the commercial he did for the Schick Injector Razor to see why sponsors had trouble with him.
Tonight, the Eversharp Company, manufacturer of Eversharp Schick Injector Razors and blades, have kindly consented to reduce the length of the commercial announcements by between 1 and 2 seconds. Eversharp likes to explain the way the razor works by having people go around saying push-pull, click, click. But I think it'd be more effective if you could actually hear this handy little gadget. So tonight we're going to make the sounds for you. The Eversharp Schick Injector Razor, of course, changes blades automatically. You take the razor in one hand, the injector cartridge in the other, and then just push. Then you just pull. Then just click, click. Works very simply. And you get the razor and 20 blades for $1.25. And the sponsor always thanks me for the commercial announcement.
Now, Morgan was featured on several episodes of Norman Corwin's Columbia Workshop, and he was also the narrator, Ivan the Terrible, and Simon Legree in Corwin's The Plot to Overthrow Christmas. Morgan's commentaries were unscripted and ad-libbed, so in the show I'm going to play for you, you'll hear pauses as Morgan gathers his thoughts or transitions from topic to topic. So here we go with a show from, here's Morgan from March 21st of 1946.
How would you like the vernal equinox yourself? Has Beethoven finished that eighth yet? Pretty tired sitting around. Good evening, anybody. This is Henry Morgan. That ought to do it. That's as much of a statement as I can possibly. I'd like a word or two with the high school set, if I may. No, not you. I want the wise guys. The ones who write letters beginning, "Dear Mr. Morgan, it may interest you to know that." And then they point out a mistake I made, usually something frightfully trivial, of course. And then the rest of the letter is taken up with assorted gems of abuse. You're the guys I want to talk to. Listen, Weisenheimers. Does any one of you know Washington's Gettysburg Address? Of course you don't. Yes, I said Washington's Gettysburg Address. I'm not out of my... I'll give you a couple of moments to sit around and sneer and to dash frantically to your history books. Won't do you any good. A few moments are up anyway. But I know Washington's Gettysburg Address by heart. If you hear coughing in the background, there's something wrong with your radio. There's nobody here. Well, I'll recite it for you, and after this, I want a little more respect out of you guys. As of October 1794, Washington's Gettysburg Address was a joint called Russell's Tavern, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Oh, well, maybe that's not as cute as I thought it was going to be. But it's a fact, nonetheless. During the so-called Whiskey Rebellion, while Washington was president, he did go to Gettysburg, and he stayed at a tavern owned at that time by a man named Russell. You don't care, huh? Listen, I'll give you a tip. Very, very few people listen to this program. So you can use that story as a sort of a parlor trick, see? Nobody else will have heard it. It's the truth, too. Still don't like it, huh? Okay, that's the way you want to be. Maybe you'd like my new cold remedy. Everybody knows that the common cold has science up the creek, paddle less. I have the cure for the common cold. Anybody interested? Any takers? Man over here will take one. All right, mister, just a minute. Be right with you. Of course, this is just my way. You may not care for it. When I catch cold, I know it can't be cured, so I pamper it, encourage it, build it up. If I do it right, it turns into pneumonia. Well, science can cure pneumonia. So that's how I get rid... Well, I laughed at Fulton once.
Far up within the gates of hell, a little baby angel, they took this baby heaven. Patiently watching.
Hold it, boy. You've got Yugoslavia.
Watches as angels come.
We have with us in the studio this evening Mr. Strabismus L. Snag, a listener who wrote in to complain of... What was it that you wanted to complain about, Mr. Snag?
Well, that was about radio. And as a matter of fact, it still is. First thing I'm mad about is announcers who.
Announcers who?
Yes. Announcers who open a program like this. They say, and here's the star of our show, Joe Bananas, our lovely songbird, Eloise Fidang, and yours truly, Hobart Busby.
Well?
Don't you see it, Jack? Yours truly, he says, like he was one of the stars. And you know what he does? The commercials.
Yes, I know.
Well, did anybody in his right mind ever tune in to hear the commercials? Where does he get that yours truly stuff? He ain't mine truly. He's no attraction to me, that boy. What's he giving himself that billing for? What's the...
Well, if that's all you have to complain about.
It ain't. Tomorrow at the same time.
I beg your pardon?
Tomorrow at the same time, I said.
You're coming back?
No, I'm against it.
You just lost me, Doc.
You tune in the radio, you hear a fellow say, tune in again tomorrow at the same time. All right, so you tune in the following day at the same time, and what do you get?
I don't know.
Well, I do. You get the same fella. And he's saying, tune in again tomorrow at the same time. Now the program's over again before you even hear it. So you tune in the next day at the same time. The same fella is still,
I get it.
what he ought to say is, tune in again tomorrow 15 minutes before the same time, see?
Well, I'm glad you found time to drop in, Mr. Snag. Oh, when can I expect you back?
Tomorrow at the same, well, I mean, figure.
Mm-hmm. Same record. You want to play that with you? Just back to the beginning. Further. You know, this could be a very entertaining program.
Hello, Richard. How are you, boy?
I can say hello to a guy in the control room. I can say hello to a guy in California, can't I? Hello, Roger. How are you? Do people seem to be avoiding you? Haven't you wondered when you read the ads whether those soap things, those toothpaste things, those scalp things, horrible as they may be, are meant for you? Did you ever stop to think that even if you use those things that make a rose bush out of you, that people still may avoid you? Did you ever stop to think that possibly you're a pain in the neck? And that's why you have so few? In the hopes that you realize you're a natural-born social outcast, the Gobbledygook Company presents this program. Gobbledygook makes sponsors' words. You've often heard an announcer say, and now a word from our sponsor. Where does he get that word? From the Gobbledygook Company. Among the other words made by this company are the word in What's the Good Word? They make that one. The word that is always got from. You know, we just got word from Joe. Joe got his word from the Gobbledygook Company. In this country, almost every day, two people somewhere have words with each other. Words made by the Gobbledygook people. And now the Gobbledygook Company presents Word Origins, an information service for people who ain't got nothing to say. Take the word incinerator. For example, the first syllable, in, comes from the Greek word halos, which means amphitheater. This relates to the Sanskrit inlos, or fruit stand. The word for fruit stand was originally in pub in Vulgate Latin. Later it came, of course, to mean rotten egg. The second syllable, sin, C-I-N, is from the Old High German Schweizkopf, or steam table. Now, of course, in those days they didn't have any steam tables, so they changed the word to Vernichtungs, or Dummkopf, meaning, look stupid, this table has no steam. As the word got older, it was changed to Schnappstein, steamless, and then it got to mean simply hot. So far we have rotten eggs hot. The suffix erator is from the Greek word erator, meaning this is the end of the word. From that point, it's fairly easy to see how in our time incinerator came to mean incinerator instead of other things. Take the word radiotelegraphy, which is two words, for one thing. Reed is from the Greek god Radcliffe, god of mill hands, fire engines, and poor box thieves. Where was I? Oh, yes. From Radcliffe, we get the word cliff, or ledge, from the Roman god Legerdemain, who had very slight hands. The word telegraphy is from tele, to bind with wire, or simply to wire, and graph comes from the Greek graphein, to write. From this we got Western Union. The radio we got from Marconi. Take the word as, aid-s. This has a fascinating history or entomology, if you're talking about bugs. Originally, the word was Fastambanglov, famous statesman who later went to Norway. From his name we get bang, loud noise, loth, which doesn't mean anything and so isn't used much anymore, and frost, which word, frost, children still use when speaking of frozen dew. Frost. If I've been able to help in any way, I'm glad.
Here's my rib. Yes, Lord, Lord, been checking up. Getting there now, getting there now. Yes, Lord, Lord, I'm getting there now. You jump out and start to run. Choo-choo down the whole shotgun. Getting there now. Yes, Lord, Lord, I'm getting there now.
That's good. Isn't that horrible that spring, such a delicate, lovely season, should sound so terrible? Vernal equinox. Yeah, but it's vernal equinox. That could be cut off the air, you know. By implication. And if you're listening, Harry Implication, I'll thank you not to cut this program. The old man in Minnesota, many years ago, who told me this story, the old man in Minnesota who told me this story many years ago was the one it's about. The old man was. This is a straight story. He was a wonderful old guy I once knew with a fine sense of humor. And it used to be a neighborhood habit to drop in on him once in a while. He owned a haberdashery in Duluth. And we'd ask him to tell his life story, which, with a twinkle in his eye, he invariably did, because he enjoyed it. This is what he said. This is true, by the way. 20 years ago, there was born on the rocky-bounded coast of Norway a little baby. Well, sir, what was he born to be, his parents asked themselves. Was he born to be a traffic policeman?
No, sirree, certainly not. Was he born to be a trolley car conductor? No, sirree, certainly not. Well then, what was he born to be? He was born to be the most extinguished merchant in the west end of Duluth, young Jesus Moo, and that's who it was. True story. Very seldom tell 'em. What did you miss? Evidently some of the adverbs dropped out going from here to the control room. Morgan will be on this same corner in front of the cigar store in New York City every night at 6:45, I think I'm on. And on the other cities around and about, sometimes on Thursday.
This is ABC, the American Broadcasting Company.
It's 7:45 at KECA, Los Angeles.
Okay, so here's Morgan. I think you'd say that in some ways it's an acquired taste. You have to like that kind of sense of humor. And if you caught the opening, he said, "Hello, anyone," which he deliberately did because Kate Smith would say, "Hello, everyone," and he didn't want to be, the same as Kate Smith, so he went the other way. And Morgan continued on radio long after the golden age ended. He was part of NBC's Monitor series, and he then in the 70s took part in the CBS Sears Radio Theater. And then he became a popular panelist on TV shows such as I've Got a Secret and What's My Line. So tonight, that's Henry Morgan.
Thank you very much, Frank. I was not familiar with that show. It's very interesting and quirky.
Quirky. Yeah, definitely quirky.
Big fan of quirky.
Sounds like it was Gene Shepard before Gene Shepard.
Yeah, possibly. Does anyone have any questions for Frank or observations?
Well, one thing that if you listen to what he was doing in his program, reminds you a great deal of Bob and Ray. It also reminds you of Willard and Scott, the Joy Boys. One was playing off the other after the other, and whoever they could steal from, they stole from. And it was good radio.
Indeed, and not unlike the Tom Lehrer song, plagiarize, plagiarize, plagiarize. Let no man's work evade your eyes. Just plagiarize. Very good.
I thought of Firesign Theater.
Frank, can you take your screen out and stop sharing your screen so we can actually see everybody? Thank you. Yay, it's magic.
Well, he got my attention when he started talking about Duluth, kind of out of the blue. Duluth, Minnesota.
Well, if you recall, Bert, that's one of these cities where he had an announcing job before he ended up in New York, back in New York, Philadelphia, Duluth, Boston, and then New York. So that very well may be a story that he heard while he was in Duluth working.
Oh, for heaven's sakes, yeah.
Isn't that something? Joni Leonard has her hand up. Can you unmute, Joni? I think there you go.
Yeah, I just unmuted. Henry Morgan had a talk show on Sunday afternoons with his wife, and I can't remember her name, but I believe it was an hour long. It was on WOR. I'm not sure what decade it was in, but it was either the 70s or 80s.
Yeah, I'm going to suggest it was probably later in his career because he divorced young and remained unmarried for like 20 some odd years before he remarried. So it wasn't with his first wife, I would guess for sure. And so it's probably later in his career, Joni.
Oh, it was. He would talk about, I think he had more than one. Well, I know that he had a a second wife, but I think he might have had a third wife. And he was always talking about how he spent all the money that he ever made on alimony for his ex-wives. And
New
he
York was an
complained
expensive state to get a divorce.
Yeah. And I used to listen to him and his wife on their Sunday afternoon show, and they were very interesting. He did some joking around, but really it was more of a serious kind of a program.
So
thank you for letting me speak.
Always. Any other questions or observations for Frank before we move on to the quiz? Well, Frank, well done, as always.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I love what you come up with for our first 15. So moving right along, we have the quiz. And for that, we have our own inimitable Sally Stevens. And I am just in the process of finding her on the list to make her a co-host as well. So Sally, you have the keys to the kingdom. Go for it.
All right, excellent. Well, it looks like we have a very full class tonight. Looking good. So everyone needs to have their materials ready. Does everyone have their materials ready? Oh, excellent. John is ready. Oh, very good. Kelly and Joni are ready. Very good, Dennis. Excellent, Brian. Very nice. Wendy, very good. Thank you, Michael. Very nice. I love to see when students come prepared to class. Now, the real question is, did everyone study? Did you do your homework?
Yes, Miss Stevens.
No, Miss Stevens.
Because let's just say the grades are starting to slip. And we're getting close to the end of the quarter, and I'm disappointed. You can't slip off that screen, Dennis. I saw you try to just slide right off that screen. Yes, I'll be speaking to you after class. Absolutely. Now, I hope you're all ready for this quiz. I will, if I can find, there are lots of new buttons on Zoom, if anyone has noticed, including the new terrifying button that involves AI, which is not good, but because the robots are going to come and take over, as we know,
And put you out of a job.
Put you out of a job.
That is not an excuse. If the dog eats your homework, then you bring the dog.
Yeah.
Not an excuse. Now, if I can find where the button to launch the poll is, since it moves every month, it seems.
Well, it's under more. It's where you find the chat.
There it is. Yep, there it is. Goodness, I'm slightly terrified of our AI companion button that has appeared. I don't think we need an AI companion when you have me. All right, so I will launch the poll. I will read the questions and the answers. You may move faster than I read on the poll. After our main program, we will go over the answers. All right. Launching poll. Okay. Number 1. Mrs. Bickerson had a very annoying brother. What was his name? A. Amos.
It was in Kingfish. Amos and Andy.
Andy. Please mute yourself. C. Kingfish. D. Arnold. Number 2. In the 26 episodes in the New Adventures of Nero Wolfe, starring Sidney Greenstreet, several actors played Archie Goodwin. Who were they? A. Harry Bartell and Herb Ellis. B. Lamont Johnson and Wally Mayer. C. Gerald Moore and Larry Dobkin. D. All of the above.
Maybe all of the above, I don't know.
Number 3. At what time was the train due to pass the victim's apartment in Sorry, Wrong Number? A. 11 o'clock p.m. B. 11:15 p.m. C. 11:30 p.m. D. 11:45 p.m. Number 4. Which of the following was not a real episode of Lights Out? A. Cat Wife. B. Mangahara. C. Night of the Demon's Ball. D. Chicken Heart. Number 5. What high school did Jack Armstrong attend? A. Madison High. B. Centerville High. C. Much too high. D. Don't get high. Well done, Frank. Oh my god. Resetting computer. Number 6. The march from The Love for Three Oranges by Prokofiev was the theme for which of the following shows? I take it all back, Frank. A. Counter Spy. B. This is your FBI. C. Mr. District Attorney. D. The FBI in peace and war. Number 7. This old-time radio doctor practiced in Rivers End for more than a decade. Who was he? A. Dr. Kildare. B. Dr. Gillespie. C. Dr. Christian. D. Dr. Adams. Number 8. Little Orphan Annie's name came from a poem written in the 19th century. Who was the poet? A. Emily Dickinson. B. Ralph Waldo Emerson. C. James Whitcomb Riley. D. Walt Whitman. Number 9. Nothing tinny about the bread this Irishman touted while hosting the Wonder Show. Who was he? A. Bert Lair. B. Wally Cox. C. Bennett Kilpack. D. Jack Haley. Number 10. Before he played Gildersleeve, Harold Perry played which of the following characters? A. Ish Kabibble. B. Herkiakaracus. C. Smagoosnock. D. Orville Weenie. There better not be any bonus rounds. You're all getting detention. All right, Frank. Neither here nor there. I hope you all were studying.
Thank you, Miss Stevens.
I'm going to leave the poll up while we have our main program going. So you can keep answering because
Great stuff.
We've
Yes,
got a
my
few.
favorite were the answers to question number 5, but that's just me. It gave me a good laugh too when I input the quiz for tonight. At any rate, thank you, Ms. Stevens. You're sounding particularly robotic these days. Very good. And now we can move on to the main part of the show. Frank Morgan would like to do give an introduction for Dr. Bailey. So I will pass that over to him. And Lona, I'm going to give you co-hosting privileges so that you can, present any material you've brought that you'd like to share with the group.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. So, Frank, would you introduce our speaker, our return, because we had her last year too.
Exactly. Thank you. Our guest tonight is Dr. Lona Bailey, and you may recall that Dr. Bailey spoke to us last spring about her book, Uncredited, The Life and Career of Virginia Gregg. In April last year, Dr. Bailey's book about another great old-time radio performer was released, Mrs. Radio, the Cathy Lewis story. And for those like me who enjoy reading and learning more about the great performers of old-time radio, Dr. Bailey will be sending to her publisher later this month her book about another great one, biography of Joan Banks, also known as Joan Banks Lovejoy. And while I have read and enjoyed reading about the stories and journeys of Virginia Gregg and Cathy Lewis, and look forward to reading about Joan Banks, tonight Dr. Bailey will tell us about my personal favorite, and I think she knows it's no secret to her, Betty Lou Gerson. Dr. Bailey's book, Betty Lou Gerson, The Voice of Villainy, was a finalist in the International Book Awards for 2023 and won the Gold Medal Award in the Dan Poynter's Global eBooks Award Contest of 2023. So tonight, coming to us from her home in Tennessee, where she lives with her husband, Chris, and 3 adorable children, I'm happy to welcome back Dr. Lona Bailey. Welcome, Lona.
Thank you so much, Frank. Thank you. I don't think I deserve that introduction, but I'm very glad to be back with you all. And yes, I'm very excited to share about Betty Lou Gerson. She's probably secretly my favorite. I don't really like to say I have favorites, but her book was fascinating to research and to write. And Frank, I think we may have talked about this through email, and it just slipped my mind until earlier tonight. But today is the 25th anniversary of Betty Lou's passing. And so she died January 12th, 1999. So I think that's wonderful to be with you guys tonight in memory of her. And I will go ahead and attempt to share my screen. I have a PowerPoint. Let's see if I can. Oh, I see. I may have to wait until I'm nominated a co-host or something, maybe. I'm not sure.
Being a co-host makes it possible for you to share your screen.
I see.
And so you should have a button, it's usually green, that says share screen or share content.
Yes, and so it says host disabled participant screen sharing. I think I've
I did not
voted down.
Well, Frank, I'm the host, but Frank just shared his screen with no problem. So I'm not quite sure. Let me cut down on the number of co-hosts. Maybe that will. Frank, I'm taking away your privileges for the moment, just because I can. Let's see, remove co-host permissions. Let me make sure you got the full make co-host. Now try it and see how if that helps any. It did?
It did. There it is. Thank you.
I had too many co-hosts. Thank you for pointing that out, Lona.
No problem. Okay. So I'm really excited to share the PowerPoint with you guys because you all probably know a little bit more about this than even I do. And so I do sort of a regional tour And a lot of times I'm going to libraries and public places to share this presentation. And a lot of people have no idea about the world of old time radio. So it's really cool to share with folks that totally know where I'm talking, know what I'm talking about, and we're kind of on the same page even before I start. So that's great. Okay, so I want to give you a little bit of an overview. Again, a lot of this is probably going to be, you know, old news to you guys. But again, most of my audiences aren't really familiar with old time radio. So that's kind of why I have this overview at the beginning. Of course, Betty Lou Gerson was a character actress during really pivotal era in American media because she was able to stay relevant for more than 30 years in all medium. And I think that's what's so fascinating about so many of these women that I have these biographies on, is they weren't these one-hit wonders. You know, they were these incredible artists that were able to stay very relevant and very poignant in all medium, and for quite a long time, which isn't really something that I think we see a lot of now. Of course, she was known for hundreds of radio shows, several television shows as well. The radio, of course, Duffy's Tavern, The Whistler, that's one of my favorites. Suspense, a few more that aren't listed. She did Broadway's My Beat, Richard Diamond, Private Detective, another favorite of mine. And of course, she kind of got her start on Chicago's The First Nighter. In television, The Dick Van Dyke Show, Perry Mason, and Hazel, another favorite. So you could kind of see, you know, just her versatility even in this really short list of her works, because she was a dramatic actress, but she also could do comedy and really anything in between. She was very, very versatile, even though she had an incredibly distinct voice. So she wasn't versatile in the sense that perhaps Virginia Gregg was, where she could kind of submerge her identity, you know, into these other characters. While Betty certainly did that, her voice is very unmistakable, right? So here is a clip from Dangerous Assignment. Again, most of my audiences, when I do this presentation, you know, they aren't really familiar with Betty's older work. They're more familiar with her as Cruella de Vil, you know, in Disney's classic 101 Dalmatians. And so I kind of throw this in here just to show a younger Cruella de Vil. So they say, really? Was she was in those black and white shows, wasn't she? So this is just a clip from this 1952 series. Oh. But there's no sound, is there? I guess you guys can't. I'm not hearing it on my end, so I don't think.
Hi. I always feel a girl should have sit and drink alone. This doesn't look right.
Bartender? Well, now you're not alone.
You probably think it's real great when you talk to me.
Oh, I wouldn't say that. Life on a train is usually rather informal.
Mrs. Sankey, the first name's Zoe.
Hey, and again, a lot of people, that's their first look at Cruella de Vil, you know, behind that iconic character, and especially years before she actually voiced that character. Here's a few more shots of Betty. You know, she was known for dozens of films as well. And again, spanning an incredible amount of time, from 1949, from her first film, to 1997, which she was in a lot of Disney productions as well, besides just the 101 Dalmatians, of course. But she started out in some of these early films, The Red Menace, and then Cinderella. You might remember her voice. Kind of the intro of that movie, she starts out as the narrator. So a little bit different than Cruella de Vil, but you could still kind of hear the husk in her voice. And a few more titles here. The Fly, that is actually pictured here with Vincent Price. That is from that film. Mary Poppins, another Disney classic, of course. And it's kind of interesting to think of this crossover. You know, that Cruella DeVille had a little cameo in Mary Poppins, but she's very hard to see in that film. And it took me a little while to kind of understand which character she was, but her title is Old Crone, and so you can see her in kind of in the scene where the little boy and the little girl, you know, they're escaping the folks from the bank, and they're running through the streets, and they kind of come to the end of an alley where there's sort of a pier, and seemingly out of nowhere, this old lady, or old crone, as it were, sort of jumps out and says something like, you know, where are you off to, or something like that. And, you know, and then Jane and Michael just screech and then run the opposite direction. And it was really neat because in my research for the book, I was able to connect with Karen Daughtris, which played Jane, the little girl in Mary Poppins. And she said, she had a great quote about Betty, because she said, we had no idea that this figure was going to be in the scene. And she said, whatever terror that you see on the faces of Jane and Michael in that scene was 100% authentic, because we had no idea that we should be expecting her. Of course, that was what the director had in mind, but the fear that we see in that scene is very real, because Betty was heavily made up, and she definitely fit the description of an old crone. Cats Don't Dance, that was another kind of it was Disney, but it was like I can't remember the other production company involved, but it wasn't really a mainstream Disney film, but that was her last film. And of course, the infamous Cruella DeVille. I don't think the sound is my friend right now, but of course you all know what Cruella sounds like, so you can imagine. Okay, and then just a little bit about Betty Lou Gerson, the person. So a lot of people ask me, you know, how did you get on to Betty Lou Gerson? I mean, besides being just a fan of old time radio, of course, you're going to come up against the careers of different artists. But Betty Lou Gerson in particular, she really stood out to me because, one, I have 3 small children, and so they love Disney movies. And when my oldest daughter was maybe 3 or so, she became very interested in 101 Dalmatians. And I hadn't seen the film, you know, in years. And as I was watching it with her, you know, over and over and over, you know, I became really curious about the voices, because of course Cruella DeVille's voice is incredibly distinct. And so I did just some nosy Google searches, you know, who are the actors involved in this production. And what stood out to me about Betty Lou was that she was a small town Southern gal, which is really funny when you think about Cruella DeVille. We don't think of Cruella as being a small town Southern gal. And Betty was born about 30 minutes south of where I live, which is really unusual because like nobody is from where I'm from, and it's a very rural area. Of course, she was born in Chattanooga, which is more of a metropolis compared to where I am. But it was just sort of struck me as interesting because, you know, she had this very like Tallulah Bankhead, almost like British affected voice. And to think that she was born in Tennessee, and she was actually raised in Birmingham, Alabama, and of course Tallulah Bankhead was too. But that's sort of what struck me with Betty, and then of course listening to all the different radio series in my research of Virginia Gregg, I ran up against Betty's work often. And so that's kind of how my introduction to Betty came about. So I was curious about her life, and how you go from small town Southern gal to Cruella DeVille, and what transpired in between. So to share a little bit with you about who she was personally, she she was born into a Jewish family. They migrated from Russia, and her father and her mother were actually distantly related. And they settled in Chicago. And so her grandparents, um, they were of working class. Her grandfather was in the stockyard unions, and so they eventually kind of trickled down further south, and they settled for a while in Chattanooga, which of course is why she was born here. But her father, MJ Gerson, he was a steel tycoon. So he kind of came from this working class stockyard background, but then he just in industry, I mean, he really had an eye for being an entrepreneur and kind of what that meant in the steel industry. And of course, Chattanooga, with the railroads and everything in the South, that was the railroads were brand new, just ahead of the Depression. And so he was very, very successful. And he was kind of what we would know as like an influencer today. And so, because he was so successful, of course, Betty's parents, they were very wealthy. She had a sister and a brother, and all three attended the finest finishing schools in Birmingham. And so I mentioned Tallulah Bankhead, and later in Betty's career, or I say later in her life, when she was getting started in radio, a lot of people thought she was Tallulah Bankhead. And she would often joke that if she would get a cold, it was really just, she might as well not even go on the air, because everyone would just be certain that that was in fact Tallulah and not Betty Lou Gerson. But it's interesting that the influence on her voice and also Tallulah Bankhead's voice kind of originated from the same, cultural influence. And as they both were raised in these Southern finishing schools that were very heavily influenced by British culture and kind of, the more aristocratic society. She moved to, she had a few moves. You guys can read about that in the book. But she eventually moved to Chicago. And it was this period of self-discovery for her, because she had been sort of restricted in a way in these very elite finishing schools. And so, one of the things in the book talks about that she dared to wear red nail polish when she arrived in Chicago, So she kind of went on this independent young woman odyssey, really. And she learned to wear pants, or as they said, trousers. That wasn't a thing in these schools that she attended. Of course, in Chicago, she met and married Joe Ainley, and he was one of the front runners of the First Nighter in Chicago, and he was quite a bit older than Betty. She was just infatuated with him, and he became her taskmaster. I mean, he was brilliant, but he was incredibly precise. He was incredibly exacting. And, she kind of, allowed herself to be trained under him, not only as her partner, but also as kind of her taskmaster. And so there are a few stories in the book about that she sort of discovered herself in Chicago, but then he kind of picked up where some of the finishing schools left off, I think, and in a way really helped her career because of his training that he sort of passed on to her. There's also a lot in the book about the radio union. She was kind of on the ground floor with that. And I find that really interesting because, as I mentioned, her grandparents were involved in the stockyard unions. And so whether she necessarily knew about that or not, I don't know. But it is interesting that that was kind of in her blood, to advocate for rights for herself and for her colleagues, just kind of in a different industry. Again, I mentioned Joe Ainley. That was her first husband. Her second husband, which I'll mention in just a moment, he also was in radio, and really a best friend to Joe. And after Joe passed away, he and Betty married. That was Lou Loria. Of course, he was the one that he was kind of the grandfather of the telephone answering service, and very well thought of, very plugged into the Chicago group of radioers. Also, there's a section about farm life, which sounds kind of random, but when Chicago radio started to sort of fizzle as so many folks moved west, Betty and Joe purchased a farm, and it was a little bit outside of Chicago, and so they would make the commute, to the station. But so it's like, to think about Corilla DeVille on a tractor, or as she's playing some of these roles, she might have just fed the chickens and then sort of traveled into Chicago, for this nightly show. And then, of course, they moved to Los Angeles shortly after. I guess it was after the end of World War II. And mentioned Lou Loria. Some of you probably remember him and his work. He was a character, I think he was a little different than Joe. Joe was kind of this stoic, as I said, taskmaster. And then Lou, I think he was more of just this very charming, hilarious kind of guy that just I think he and Betty made a great couple, as for their kind of later life marriage. And in Los Angeles, of course, Betty's career with radio continued. I wouldn't say that it was like an instantaneous transfer or anything, like, oh, you were really big in Chicago, so of course you're going to be really big in LA. I mean, I think it was, she kind of had to cut her teeth on what LA expected compared to Chicago. It was very different. And I think there was a little bit of like, the Chicago people kind of thought like they had it figured out. And then I think like the LA radio people kind of felt like they had it figured out. And so I think there was some tension, when she and Joe first arrived. And of course, being a woman, it was harder for her, to kind of to break down some of those barriers. And I think with Joe and of course the First Nighter program, I think it was a little bit easier for him to kind of just step right in and adapt to that a little bit more so than Betty, because she was known as the soap queen in Chicago. And, by the time late 40s came around, a soap queen meant something very different than it meant, in the early 30s and mid 30s when she started. So I think it was a little challenging for her when they made the move, but eventually, of course, they acclimated, and she and Joe both became very renowned for West Coast radio, just as much as they had been with Chicago. I mentioned the American Cancer Society because Betty was very involved in that whenever she came to Los Angeles. When Barbara Luddy, who was a very dear friend of hers, when she made the move, I guess she was diagnosed with cancer, and so she became really involved in the ACS. And so she kind of recruited Betty because Betty, her personality was just very fiery, and she was just very dedicated whenever there was, something that she was passionate about. And so Barbara said, you know what, you would be a wonderful recruiter for this. And so Betty would, this was like when Betty was like in her 70s, and she would take her own personal car and pick up cancer patients from their homes and drive them to their appointments. And she had this like huge volunteer button, and so Betty was very efficient. She was, very, just very always punctual and just, very serious. She took her job very seriously. And it's funny to think about, some of these people probably had no idea that she was this radio star and that she was actually Cruella de Vil. Hopefully she didn't drive the same way that Cruella de Vil drove. But that was the ACS was something that she was very passionate about and volunteered a lot of her time to. SAG after, of course, was also something she was very passionate about for obvious reasons with the early days of the radio union establishment. And she was very dedicated to supporting up and coming artists. And so she was in no way one of these folks that would just say, okay, we're kind of a upperclassmen here, and we're going to preserve what we have. She certainly was passionate about that, but she also saw the benefit in paying it forward to these newer and younger artists. And as I mentioned, she did die 25 years ago today. She suffered a stroke at home, and she was in the hospital for a few days. Betty had no children. She did have stepchildren. Lou Lauria had 4 children. But I wasn't really able to collect information on Betty in terms of, any children that she had or in that way. But one guy that I did connect with was her nephew, and I think he's in his 90s. Sweet man. He was a very successful architect in Chicago. And so it was wonderful to hear him talk about Aunt Betty and kind of her life in Chicago, which is more the era that he knew her is when she lived there. And yeah, just to hear some of his personal memories. It was wonderful. All right, so we talked a little bit about Betty Lou Gerson, the person. So we'll talk a little bit about kind of her legacy. She was I mentioned the Radioers Union. She was a pioneer in the beginnings of all of these medium, really from coast to coast, quite literally. And she was on the ground floor for so many of these things. Excuse me. And I don't think she ever really knew how important her contribution was to all 3 medium. And there are a few stories in the book about her humility and the fact that even with Cruella de Vil, like she just didn't really know the significance of that character. And there's one quote that I included from a newspaper interview she did not long before she died. And she said, well, I have been told that some people dress up as Cruella and go to Halloween parties. And this was in the 90s, and you just think what an interesting statement. It's like, Cruella is just an icon. I mean, she's really a timeless and worldwide icon. So she was very of course her contribution far exceeds just the Cruella de Vil character, but overall I don't know that Betty ever really knew how important her work was and is. So she would hate my saying this. She would just absolutely hate this, but I'm going to say it anyway. She was a feministic icon, I believe. Now, maybe not perhaps in the way that we understand what that means today in 2024. But she, politically, she was very against feminism, and she, she was very adamant that Gloria Steinem just had to go. She did not care for her, and that type of ideology. But when you think about, the era in which she was born and raised and in which she sort of discovered herself and her career, she really was a feministic icon in this very empowering type of way. And we think about soap operas, and especially today, a lot of people say, oh, these soap operas. But the truth is, they were very important types of media, especially when they were first, put on the air, because we're really talking about, stories that featured women that were often written by women, and that was a big deal in the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, and honestly, sometimes it's even a big deal today. And so Betty really, she was maybe unknowingly so, but she was the voice for women. And whether it was housewives, listening to these programs, or in this unifying kind of way, because not only was she a voice for women, but the neighbors and friends and things, oh, did you listen to this? What's going to happen next week on this series? And so in that way, I do think she was a champion for females, and I think in a way still is. Certainly with the villainous persona and Corella, and really even some of the villainesses that she portrayed on radio, she brought a femininity to wickedness, that it hadn't really been there before in terms of audience reception. Because we think about perhaps Snow White, and the villain, this old hag, the witch and everything. And then certainly Margaret Hamilton's portrayal of the Wicked Witch of the West and the Wizard of Oz. And we don't really think of maybe femininity being associated with that. We just think of kind of the old crone description, as I mentioned earlier. But aside from her Mary Poppins cameo, Betty really brought a femininity to villainy that before didn't exist. And I believe, and you may, after you read the book, maybe you'll have your own opinion on this. I think she has attained stardom really on her own terms. She perhaps wasn't the A-lister as we think of some of those names that became household names, but she, in a way, she really attained a degree of stardom that fit with her own context. And for a woman especially, I think that was a pretty big deal in her era. I also think, with her legacy is very interesting, spanning the decades that it did, from going from the Old South in 1914 to Los Angeles in 1997. I mean, that's a huge jump, not just geographically, but if we think about all of the things that America went through during that time, and she certainly went through those things as well. But I think what was so interesting is a lot of the folks that I talked to that knew her, they say that she was not hardened by any of those things. She was able to change her perspective. She was able to evolve, with the times. And I think that's a really cool thing too, because she was able to be, be very strong in her own convictions, but also she was pliable in that, she was open to awareness, and she was open to a different interpretation of life than perhaps the very restricted and repressive one that she was born into. And of course, gave us very memorable performances, but turned the idea, like I said, of villainy on its head with Corella. And Corella is still, these movies are still being made. I think there's another Corella that's supposed to come out maybe this year or next year with Emma Stone. And the legacy that she left behind just for Corella, I think is pretty awesome. I don't think there's anybody that doesn't know who Corella is, in this cultural reference. So that's pretty cool. And there she is. That was not too long before she passed away. And I have an interview with her, but I don't know if I'm not really sure what's going on with the sound. I don't know if you guys will be able to hear it, but if not, she is so adorable. I wish that this would play. I'm not really sure.
Around and
Oh.
she was just really the most fun I've ever had doing anything in the car, going down the road. It was running around, and she was just screaming, Jasper. I enjoyed doing it tremendously. Do you understand? It was the sweep was something, you know. You sweep into the room. You do this with broad gestures. We saw the storyboard. I had the feeling that a little of me came through in it. And then you think about cheekbones got higher, the face got a little skinnier. I don't like to use the word camp, but that was basically it. She never frightened me. So I didn't think I could frighten anybody else. Well, now, what have we seen? I keep bumping into people who said, God, I remember you when I was a little bitty baby, you scared me to death. I can't believe that. You know, I never had that feeling that it was that terrifying. To me, she was such a fun character, and I loved it. I thought she was wonderful, frankly. I thought she was just marvelous.
I love that. I'm so glad that I figured out the volume because I love that interview with her. Again, that was not very long before she passed away, but it's like you just want to have coffee with her, right? It's like when you see that, you're like, oh, she was just awesome. She was great.
But it was the most.
Okay, and so yes, and this picture is from she was awarded the Disney Legends Award, and for of course Cruella. But really, like I said, she was in several Disney productions, and so you know, she certainly was a Disney legend, just even beyond Cruella. But that was, you know, when they were doing the her handprints there, and I believe those are, I can't remember where they're stored. I think that was actually in, I think that was in Disneyland, not Disney World, but I could be mistaken on that. That's a great picture too. Okay, any questions about any of that? That was kind of a lot of material, but if you have any questions, I would love to chat.
It's interesting that in that interview, she definitely had her Southern accent that she would set aside when she would do these roles.
Yes, yes, it is, and it's interesting. If you listen to like what's available anyway of her early things, you can really hear some of that coming through. And when I spoke with her nephew, I guess his mother, Betty's older sister, would get pretty frustrated with her and say, you know, we lost our Southern accents. Like, what are you doing still talking like that? And so they kind of accused her of having an affected voice and just sort of like doing that on purpose. But there's a lot of the really early recordings where you can very clearly hear that it was real. It was absolutely real.
Lana, you mentioned about that her family had wealth, but you wrote about the struggles that she had after her father died, so that it wasn't all, you know, all good. She did have a tough time. The family had a tough time after the father passed away. They lost their wealth, as I recall.
Yes, yes, and that is true. Her father was killed under sort of mysterious circumstances when she was, I believe, 13. And yes, they from what I understand, her mother was maybe not a wonderful steward of what he had arranged, you know, to leave behind. And they went from a very affluent lifestyle to, I don't want to say poverty, but it was a drastic change in a very short period of time. So yes,
I think you said,
Mhm.
yeah, I think you said they ended up attending public schools after attending all these private schools.
Yes, and that is true. She didn't graduate from public school, but she did go there for at least a year. And it was a very difficult transition because she was in this class of where they had cotillions, and you know, she had this very distinct way of speaking that for her peers that was hard, you know, to swallow because they were just regular folks, and she was kind of coming in with this like posture and this, you know, this voice and this vocabulary that really stood out in a public school environment. So yes, it was very different for a while.
Yeah, I also I'm sorry, John. John
No,
William.
please go right
Yeah,
ahead.
John
Please.
Williams had his hand up for a
No, no.
while.
Yeah, go
It's
ahead.
okay.
No,
It's no, please, Frank. I'll yield the floor to you, and then I'll let you pass it back.
all right. No, I wanted to mention in the shows that she did with Gerald Moore, who's another voice character that I really enjoy. They were equals in the shows. She wasn't subservient in any sense. She was as sly. She was as I guess deceptive, and you know, they interacted very, very well. I thought in the number of programs that they did on the Whistler in particular, and
Yes.
you know, I like the idea that they were portrayed as equals in their roles.
Hmm. Yes, which was
John,
kind of unusual in a way.
John William, there you go. I'm sorry, I before.
No worries. It's all good. And Dr. Bailey, this is a wonderful presentation. Thank you. You'd mentioned something early on about how she got the title of, I guess, was it soap opera queen or soap opera queen of Chicago? And if I heard correctly, you said something about struggled with it or there was a challenge to it. Can you elaborate about that a bit?
Sure. I think that because there was such a difference in Chicago radioers and the Los Angeles radioers, I think that really it became a sticking point with when she made the transition to the West Coast. I think it was also a sticking point for her family because, as I mentioned, I think that from what her nephew said, you know, her sister she was older, and so I think she kind of maybe was a bit critical of Betty at times as just her kid sister, you know, and so she would say things like, you know, well, save it for the radio, Betty, you know, if they were on the phone, and, you know, so she was very, I think as sisters can do, you know, I think she could be cutting in terms of kind of giving a maybe a sarcastic tone to this title of soap queen. And she was always accused of being very dramatic, but it's like, well, of course, you know, she was an actress. Of course she was dramatic. So I think that within her family, I think that was maybe something that wasn't as glorious as what we think it is to be a soap queen. And I think that LA had a little bit different perspective on that early Chicago work. Because Betty and Joe, you know, they were involved in like the First Nighter and kind of these really these flagship shows for Chicago. And so I do think that they kind of had an air about them that was maybe comparable to like Broadway versus you know, B movies or something. You know, I think there was a little bit more sensationalism with Hollywood radio than Chicago because they kind of felt like, well, we're the real artists, you know, we don't have the flash of Hollywood, yet we're still able to have these, you know, deliverables that are more artsy and organic in a way.
So would you say it was like it wasn't that the fame got to her head like a Fraser Crane thing? It was more of like the label became one of those parachutes or sea anchors that kept dragging her back of like, well, she really doesn't have the talent for big stuff. Let's just put her in the background. Okay.
Right.
Like
kind of typecast. Yes, yeah. Exactly. Yes.
All right. Thank you. That was helpful.
Yes, thank you.
Do we have more questions? Frank, I'm sure you have more that you would love to say.
Yeah, well, what I know that she did the First Nighter, and Don Amici was, of course, there, and I did a presentation on Don Amici a bit back, but I was never able to find any audio of the two of them together. I did find some with Jim Amici, who of course sounded much like his brother, but you know, I'd love to be able to find some of her and Don Amici together, but I don't think that there is any that exists.
Yeah, I have not been able to locate any of those either. I would love to. I would love to hear more of the First Nighter, but I think I've only heard maybe 2 full shows of that. So I don't know that there's a lot still in existence, but yeah, wonderful show, very unique.
Yeah, well, the Bolen Soule and Barbara Luddy episodes are the ones that are in circulation. So those are the ones that we get to hear.
Yes.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I think you kind of mentioned in the book that when we were talking about the move to California, they were Chicago. I mean, they were king and queen of Chicago. And when they went to LA, they had to take you know, they had to take a step down because they weren't the same. They weren't considered as the same level. They had to prove themselves in California.
Yes, absolutely. Which again, I think it was a little easier for Joe than it was for Betty. But Lorraine Tuttle is the one that Betty credits with really getting her foot in the door, because Lorraine supposedly heard her and just was incredibly impressed with her voice and her talent, and said she just, in those days, I guess you just called people up. And so she called Betty up and said, I think you're wonderful. And I want you, I want to put you in front of some big names, because I think you can really make a go of it here. And so Betty was always incredibly complimentary of Lorraine, and just very grateful, for her outreach to her once they got to LA.
Yeah. Lorraine Tuttle is certainly another person who was very important in the union, and I think she was one of the founders of one of the unions out there, and she had a lot of influence and certainly could put Betty Lou in touch with the right people.
Yes, absolutely.
This is just wonderful. Any other questions from anyone, or observations, curiosities?
Yeah, I always loved her guest appearances on Sam Spade.
Oh,
Yes.
Yeah, she appeared on Sam Spade, and also with Gerald Moore on the Adventure. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, on the Adventures of Sam Spade. Yeah.
Mhm. Yes, she and Gerald Moore were just wonderful. They had this chemistry that was just it was just captivating. I really enjoyed their work together.
I did, if I can jump in, Dr. Bailey.
Yes.
Because I just pulled up her biography on IMDb, and just looking at that time when, because she's coming up into this age of radio at the same time where she's young enough to have gone through some schooling and stuff like that. Did she get schooling and training on how to use her voice and keep her voice, or was it just innate talent? That's always kind of aspect of early radio that fascinates me, is the use of voice and knowing how to use it. So
Yes, absolutely. Because I think so many radio artists were either prior to radio or during their radio career also musicians, and so they had the benefit of having this really keen ear for sound, and for kind of mimicking different sounds as an instrument would. Certainly Virginia Gregg was that way. Kathy Lewis was that way. And but Betty was I mean, I think she had some musical training for sure, but in these private schools that she attended, they were very focused on recitation and diction. And so a lot of that can be seen also in like Tallulah Bankhead's uh radio work, especially. But they had this very very specific way that they would kind of with addiction, was very influenced by the British way of speaking. And so I think early on she did have that training in school, of course not for radio necessarily, but I think that Joe Ainley was probably her primary schooling in a sense, because he was a musician, and he was a conductor for several different orchestras before he moved to Chicago and started in radio. And so even though she went to dramatic school, um, I think Joe probably was a greater influence on her way of speaking and her precision with radio work, maybe than even the school itself.
thank you.
Yes.
Do you happen to remember which dramatic school she went to?
So yes, possibly I do. So she went to, is it Slavsky? Is that a school? I think maybe that's a school. There was a name that she mentioned that was in an interview. I believe it was with Chuck Shaden. It's in the book. I think it was like Stanislavski or something. And
Stanislavski.
Well, there was Stanislavski method was certainly taught,
yeah,
but I'm not sure around the time that she was getting started.
right. It's in the book, like I said, but I can't remember and the Goodman something Chicago. I do think she studied with the method. Of course, it was kind of a weird thing back then. I mean, the classically trained artists weren't necessarily interested in that. But I know she worked with, like, I think it's the Goodman Theater company. She was kind of in these stock companies that almost served as schools. We don't really have those now outside of Little Theater in these cities, but at the time, these stock companies provided a lot of the training that perhaps dramatic schools or institutions would provide today.
Right. Well, the Goodman Theater is very well known in Chicago.
Yes.
And still is.
Yes.
Still a force in Chicago theater.
Yes.
Well, this is just wonderful, guys. You could probably stop sharing your screen now.
Okay.
Lona.
All right.
I think we've kind of memorized this photo of her. It's a wonderful.
Yeah, I have
picture.
I usually do like quizzes, but I don't have any virtual prizes. So but yeah, you guys can totally check the book out on Amazon, and
Great.
got a few others. Of course, Virginia Gregg, Kathy Lewis, and coming next week, Joan Banks Lovejoy. So that will be on Amazon very soon. And yeah, I will go ahead and turn it back over.
No, it's wonderful. And thank you so much for coming and sharing all of your research with us, which is clearly considerable amount of work that you've done. And it's so nice to see you in better health.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I'm doing much better, and I have to be doing better because I have these 3 children that I have to keep up with. So,
they'll keep you in shape for sure.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Actually, if I may, Monday you're celebrating what, Lana?
Yes,
The 15th.
1 year. Yes, 1 year ago Monday, I suffered a stroke, and it was very unexpected. I don't have any health problems or anything. I'm 36, so it was very, very unexpected. But I have recovered, I would say 100%, if not at least 99%. A lot of the things about my personality that are quirky, I like to blame on the stroke, but I think they were just there all the time. But yes, I've recovered very well, and I'm happy to still be here, and I'm happy to still be doing things like sharing these legacies of these wonderful radio queens.
Well, and also introducing them to younger audiences. I mean, doing the tours in libraries and that kind of thing is really wonderful.
Yes.
And of course, the thing is that the live action 101 Dalmatian movies have sort of taken over. So, I remember when the Disney movie was released, and it was a smash hit at the time. And I actually even had the little book that had the story based on. I mean, it was really, and of course it was the height of the cartoons, the great cartoonists as well. So you had this beautiful action, and it was very, very memorable. So that's fun for you to be able to sort of. It's a good way in to younger people to sort of say, now this character was voiced by this woman, and it was certainly memorable voicing, to say the least.
Definitely.
Great.
Dr. Bailey, one question I just thought of.
Yes.
Who's on your project list for coming books?
Oh, I'm glad you asked. That is
I knew you wanted to
great
hear that question.
Well done, John. Thank
Yes.
you.
Well, I love that I'm being asked that question by radio folks, because when just like regular people ask me, they have no idea who I'm talking about when I say my next subject. So right now I am pitching a it's kind of a biography, but also sort of like a behind the scenes for the actual film of Bambi. And so the biography portion will be of Paula Winslow, the radio lady who voiced Bambi's mother. And so it's interesting with kind of the mainstream market. You know, you can't just say, I want to write a biography on this great radio lady, because they say, I can't help you with that. Because you know, that is not necessarily something that will sell in a very mainstream commercial kind of way. But what's interesting about it is, you know, I think it is either later this year. It's kind of like Corella 2. It's either later this year or next year. They are coming out with the first live action, like CGI Bambi. And so I think it's a cool time to kind of look at the icon of Bambi's mom, because she's sort of like even more important than Bambi was, because everybody just goes like, oh, geez, you know, Bambi's mom had to die, you know what, like that's just this horrible cultural loss, you know. And the film was so impactful that it's left this legacy of kind of like Corella, Bambi's mother. And Paula Winslow had a wonderful radio career, and I think she was maybe underutilized somewhat, but she was seems like has a wonderful story, very, very interesting. So she's kind of who I'm looking at next. We'll see what my agent thinks.
I'm
You
looking
have to
forward to
pitch the
that
agent.
because of like a lot of people of my generation, yeah, Bambi was a big thing when we were kids.
Yes, yes.
Maybe that's why I am the way I am, seeing his mother.
Right, exactly. Well, you know, Stephen King blames his whole career on Bambi, because he said that was the first horror movie that he ever watched, and it greatly affected him. So,
Yeah, blindsided a lot people.
yes.
What do you mean this? You know, oh, Bambi, yay.
Oh, yeah.
And then suddenly, you know, all these people are being killed and burned, and it's just sort of like,
Exactly.
I can see that point of view. Well, this has really been delightful.
Yes, thank
Lana.
you.
Thank you so much for
Yes.
Coming to share your research with us again. That is just terrific.
Yes, well, thank
Sure,
you.
Frank has already signed you up for next year. For the new
Oh, well, I would love it. I so enjoy it. And like I said, I just love to connect with other folks that appreciate the old time radio, because in my generation, that's a little bit hard to find. And especially in my geographical region, that's difficult to find. And so I'm just glad that you guys invite me.
Oh, well, welcome and just wonderful. And I hope the book sells like hotcakes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just terrific. So, and you're getting all kinds of clappings and everything else. We're very big on that. I like the deaf clapping.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Well done, well done, Miss Stevens. So, without further ado, I'm sure all of you are champing at the bit to find out which high school was the one that was the correct answer in the fifth question, but there are other questions too. So, Miss Stevens, would you like to help us grade our papers?
Yes, unfortunately we can't exchange our papers, so you're all going to have to be honest and sign the honor pledge.
Ooh.
Yeah, I'm looking at you, Wendy.
I was cheating and looking at John Abbott's page.
It's terrible. I'm going to have to give this entire class detention It's just going to be awful. I don't want to give my Saturday up for remediation here, kids, but I might have to. Just
Mrs.
terrible.
Peterson had a very neither here nor there.
All right. Now I'm going to end the poll here. It looks like we've got about 19 people participated on the poll. So I'm going to end it now.
Zoom meeting.
And I am going to share the results. So give me a thumbs up that you can see it, please. Awesome. Great. Okay. Thank you very much. Now, I'm going to go through the answers, but just because it looks like we have some leaning towards the popular vote does not mean that's necessarily the correct answer. This is just what people have entered. So let's see how we did, class. Neither here nor there, courtesy of Frank. Number 1. Mrs. Bickerson had a very annoying brother. What was his name? Where is E? Frank. Oh, I guess that's not an option. Well, a few of us picked Andy and Kingfish, and we were most people said Arnold, but some people said Amos. The correct answer is A. Amos. Amos. He tried to fool you with an Amos and Andy reference to throw you off, but the correct answer is Amos. Number 2, in the 26 episodes in The New Adventures of Nero Wolfe, starring Sidney Greenstreet, several actors played Archie Goodwin. Who were they? We were all over the place, but the majority did select D, all of the above. And this is one time the majority will win. D is correct. All of the above. All of these fine actors did portray Archie Goodwin at some point. Looks like Archie couldn't keep a job. Number 3. At what time was the train due to pass the victim's apartment in Sorry, Wrong Number, my personal favorite program? We were almost split between 11 and 11:45. One said 11:30, but good job to the majority. It is 11:15. In fact, I think of it often when I see 11:15. I don't know what that says about me. Let's try not to think about that too much. This is class, not a therapy session. Number 4. That was B, by the way. B is the correct answer. Number 4. Which of the following was not a real episode of Lights Out? Boy, I can't wait to find these episodes, first of all. I do remember Catwife. So that one I knew was an episode. And most of us know Chicken Heart was an episode. Thank you, Arch Oblin. But Mungahara, oh boy, I want to figure that one out because I don't recognize that title. And I just want to say it about 12 more times. So I'm gonna. Mungahara, Mungahara, Mungahara. If I had to say all those other things, I'm at least gonna say the one word that made me giggle on the inside. Mungahara. You can say it funny. You can say it fast. You can say it slow. It sounds great no matter how you say it. I don't know what it is. Who knows what that episode's gonna be? But that one is a Lights Out episode, so I'm gonna find it. The one that is not a Lights Out episode is C, Night of the Demon's Ball, which, that's probably for the best because the demons getting together for a ball. Let's not. Number 5. What high school did Jack Armstrong attend? Boy, spot on, Frank. You got me on this one. Madison High. Did Jack Armstrong go to class with Armis Brooks? No, he did not. Sorry to those of you who did get tricked there. Did he attend? So Centerville High seems like it would be the correct answer. Frank. What high school did Jack Armstrong attend? Frank.
Centerville.
Is that the accurate answer?
Yes.
Oh. Well, on my answer sheet, I have a different answer, so I will
Oh.
confer with my.
Oh, I'm
Don't
sorry.
worry, it wasn't much too high or don't get high. But those are, those are for the School of Hard Knocks. But
And that
some of our
reveals-
students have come from those schools, so we can ask them how those
and that shows how closely I didn't look at the answer sheet to read because I would have noticed that
I
was
don't look at it until I read it because I like to play too.
exactly.
So
Me
Centerville
too.
High it is.
I wanted to go to Don't Get High.
Number 6. The march from the Love for Three Oranges by someone who I'm sure whose music is beautiful, but whose name I'm sure I butchered.
Prokofiev.
Yep. I bet I did. Because you try saying those names while sounding like a computer. Was the theme for which of the following shows? We were all over the place. We thought, maybe a few of us thought Counter Spy, Mr. District Attorney. Some of us thought This Is Your FBI. The majority went with D, the FBI in Peace and War. And the majority does have it. D, the FBI in Peace and War, War and Peace. The really long book. Number 7. This old-time radio doctor practiced in Rivers End for more than a decade. Who was he? Woo! We had an overwhelming majority go for Dr. Christian. And good job, overwhelming majority. Doc Adams was out there in Dodge. Dr. Kildare was over in New York, I'm pretty sure. Because I think I had to answer that question for something. And I don't know who Dr. Gillespie is. So, frankly, maybe. So, Dr. Christian, he's out there at Rivers End. Bonus points if you knew the hospital. Unless Rivers End is the hospital. Then no bonus points. Take them all away. It's been a long day, guys. It's been a long week. Number 8. Little Orphan Annie's name came from a poem written in the 19th century. Who was the poet? We had a few that guessed Emily Dickinson, Ralph Waldo Emerson, or Walt Whitman, but the majority again went for James Whitcomb Riley. And, good job, majority, that is the correct answer. What was the name of the poem? Bonus points for that. Class.
Joni Leonard has her hand up. Let me see if I can get her to. Joni, do you?
It was Little Orphaned Annie came to our house to stay.
There you go.
Bonus points for Joni. Everyone
Yay.
else, I hope you do your homework. Sending home extra next
See,
time.
I did my homework.
Good job.
Good girl.
Even before the question was given to me, I did my homework.
Number 9. Nothing tinny about the bread, this Irishman touted while hosting the Wonder Show. Who was he? We had a few sprinklings for Bert Lair, Wally Cox, and Bennett Kilpack, but the majority said Jack Haley, and the majority gets it again. D. Jack Haley is the correct answer. Frank, I'm disappointed you had to put a Gildersleeve question in here. I'm very disappointed. Just saying. highly disappointed about this. As many of you know, this is my least favorite character on old time radio. Almost as much as BB. Probably more, actually. Number 10. Before he played Gildersleeve, Harold Perry played which of the following? Did he play Ishkabibble? Maybe? Did he play this unpronounceable character? Oh my goodness. Park Yakigurus. Park Yakigurus? How would one say that rapidly? Park Yakigurus. Park Yakigurus. I give up.
It's Parka Yakarkis.
That makes a lot more sense. Thank you, Edgar. Bonus points. You can have 2 extra bonus points. Throw it on your quiz.
Thank you. Thank you.
Smagooznak? Don't look at me. I didn't make the quiz. Or D, Orville Weenie. My personal favorite, perhaps. Now, which one do we think he actually played? Frankly, if I hear Harold Perry, I'm turning it off. So I do not know. And if I heard one of these names, I would definitely be turning it off. You're like, I'm out of here. But the correct answer is C. Smagooznak on Sealtist Parade. Bonus points if you've ever heard that character. Right now, go ahead. Anybody? Only Frank. Only Frank has heard this character. Of course he has. Now, I'll hand out bonus points if you can name the show that Ishkabibble was on.
Edgar's got that one.
Edgar,
I know that. Kay Kaiser
Very
and
good.
his
Extra
College
bonus
of
points.
Musical Knowledge.
Throw them on your quiz.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now that I know how to pronounce Parkiakarkus, which now makes a lot more sense, though it's not anywhere near phonetic. Let's not even talk about that. I can read phonetic spelling. I teach elementary school. This is not phonetic.
Sally?
What program was that on?
That was on Eddie Cantor, I think.
And this, children, is an example of someone who did their homework.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hope
Thank
you're
you,
all
teacher.
watching. The last one, Orville Weenie. Program.
Kelly has her.
Kelly, thank you for raising your hand.
I think Lum and Abner? No?
No, but that is a very, very vital.
Oh, is it Vic and Sade?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Vic and Sade.
You got it.
Okay.
I mean, if I didn't know, I would have been like, yes, that sounds like a character from Lum and Abner. Absolutely. I mean,
cut from the same cloth.
The scary thing about this part of the quiz, Frank, is that all of these are actual characters. That's the scary thing about it.
Yes, because a lot of certainly in that question, the answers looked as if Frank just sort of hit keys randomly on the keyboard.
I was starting to think that he did.
Weird answer.
I was starting to think that he did. But
I'm convinced he did. There's no way those are real characters. Edgar's lying to the class. He's trying to butter up the teacher. That's all there is to it.
Well,
Sally?
I can be easily buttered if someone else wants to bring me nice questions.
Oh boy. Joni Leonard has her hand up again.
With
Go for
Jack
it, Joni.
Armstrong, I thought in the theme, and this is probably in the later ones, raise the flag for Hudson High School. Am I right or am I
Tony, you
wrong?
are correct.
I think you're correct.
Yeah, she is correct.
And that's the answer that was on my answer key.
Yeah.
But it was
Yeah.
not the one that was in the question, the answer among the answers.
I guess I didn't hear that because I didn't hear Hudson High School mentioned.
But you
And
didn't
It wasn't.
because, no,
Oh, it
yeah.
wasn't. Okay, good.
When I did that question, I changed the names of the schools several times until I got what I liked. And obviously, in doing so, I misplaced Hudson High. So, Joni, thank you for correcting me. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're
Well
very,
done,
very
Joni.
welcome.
You
Thank
have to get
you.
up
Two
early
people
to
did
beat.
their homework.
You have to get up early to beat this crowd. I tell you.
Sally. Oh,
Ed-
Dennis.
Edgar,
Yes,
Can you see my tie, Dennis and Sally?
yes, Edgar, you
I
have
see we
made
have
my
an
day.
official tie
Oh,
check.
good.
Thank
You
you,
have
Edgar.
made
We
my day.
appreciate
Official
that
tie
you
check.
we
and I can
appreciate that you
definitely
come
tell you,
appropriately dressed to the meeting.
Edgar changed his tie for tonight because
That's right.
earlier today he was wearing a different necktie.
That's right. I did it especially for you two.
He dressed for the meeting
You
tonight.
must come dressed for the meeting.
You
Yes.
have,
Absolutely.
I
for
came
those of
dressed
you
as a
that
PBS
don't
nerd.
know, Edgar has the coolest tie
Thank you,
ever.
Lona appreciated that.
And it's got a old radio
See,
on it.
thank you. I saw that nod. Thank you.
It's a great tie. It's
Fellow
nice when
nerd.
people appreciate such things.
Well,
All right,
you
I
know,
officially say
Here's
class
ne-
dismissed. Go do your
Thank
homework.
you, Miss Stevens.
You're welcome.
Have a nice
All
weekend.
meeting notes, whiteboard, closed, AI companion.
Brian, you have your hand up. Did you have a question or you're on mute? Brian, you're on mute.
I'm sorry about that.
No, go.
I just wanted to mention that Park Your Carcass was really Harry Einstein, who was the real father of comedian Albert Brooks. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
That's great. Thank you.
and is he also the father of Bob Einstein or Super Dave? Am I correct on that too?
I'm not sure of that.
Yeah, they're brothers. Or
Yes. Yep.
The collective knowledge of this group is truly terrifying to me.
It is. It's frightening.
Use your powers for good.
Yeah, that's what we attempt to do. Well, that was a delightful quiz, Frank. Thank you. It was a very nice balance between more generally known answers and more obscure. So that it was a perfect balance, in my opinion. So you all can throw tomatoes at me if you don't agree, but they'll
you,
land on
Wendy.
your screen, not mine.
I'll save my tomatoes for Frank. I'm just
Well,
kidding, Frank. It was fun.
At this point,
I just want to say before I go to bed, because I don't feel that great.
Oh.
Great job, Dr. Bailey. And I'll see you tomorrow, daughter.
Feel better, Dennis.
Farewell.
Yeah, I've got a frog in my chest.
Oh dear. Well, we got to get that.
Good night, all.
Where
Keep you
that?
in our prayers,
We'll
Dennis.
get you a duck, and the duck will eat the frog or something, maybe. All right. Well, ending recording.